Welcome to Studium to Studio with your local lay Dominicans. We'll be discussing some of the gems we've discovered in our studium, where we share the fruits of our contemplation and the joy of the gospel message. Representing our St. Albert the Great lay Dominican chapter and co-hosts of today's show are myself, Cheryl Drozda,
Jeff Drozda,
Matthew Mayer.
And today, Matthew's brought with him a topic that he really wanted to discuss. It's on distributism. And this is, I always think of this as an area that's not my forte, but I'm very interested to hear what you have to say about, I guess, more of the philosophical parts of, or would you say?
I mean, it's more of an economy based off of a philosophy, but it's more really based off of Catholic social thought, because This is based really on it's based on how the monks would live, but we're not monks, but it's based on a monk-like lifestyle.
Okay.
So to start off, some people have misconceptions of what distributism is. It's not distribution of wealth; it's distribution of property, which what they have more really in mind is land. And another misconception is the idea that I remember reading this. I don't recommend going on Mises Institute, but I sometimes go on it just to see the other side of the argument. And one of the arguments I read was don't do distributism because not everyone wants to be an owner. I don't think that's what distributism had in mind. The ideal is for everyone to be an owner, but realistically, what I think what it's trying to say is everyone should have the opportunity to be an owner. If they don't want to be, they want to be a worker, that's fine. The thing is, they shouldn't be forced to be a worker. They should have the opportunity to be an owner as well.
So a choice of...
Yes.
Right.
So when we talk about distributism, I mean, isn't it like in between like capitalism and socialism? It's like some sort of bridge that's trying to bring it all together, or maybe find that middle ground that's more workable. Is that my understanding? It's
usually seen as the middle between capitalism and socialism, but in honesty, distributive lifestyle was working like this before we had capitalism and socialism, at least in the medieval era. And I guess you could say capitalism and socialism are basically the economy gone wrong whenever things got out of hand. So I guess you could say distributism was always practiced. It was just never called that way. But distributism is basically a call going back to how it was back then, but with some improvements. It was feudalism back then. Distributism is not really for feudalism. It's for private property, but think that everyone should have private property. Capitalists going to say the same thing, but in a sense, it's also focusing more on cooperation because of human nature, Catholic idea of human nature, which goes back to Aristotle, really, that man is a social animal. Well, actually, he said political animal, but he is still a social animal naturally. And that's basically what the distributist mind is that they should be more cooperative, but at the same time, it's not socialist, because socialism is more based off of pantheism, which is basically they deny the individuality of the cooperation, that there should be some people who, yes, you can say is some people who have to have private property. That's the thing. That's the thing right there. That's the thing that's not for socialism, is private property, which emphasizes individuality. But it's also not capitalism, because capitalism is based on individualism, which would make it inherently atheistic.
So in terms of property, so in other words, the capitalist, I guess, is society, you would find a lot of property focused and concentrated in a small number of hands, correct?
Correct. That would be the idea.
Okay, and then so socialism, you have property concentrated, I guess, in the state? I mean, the government would be mostly controlled of the property?
In some ways, but I also want to be careful, because there's also libertarian socialism and there's guild socialism, which is almost the same thing, where their focus is on basically cooperation, but the big thing is that they don't, the root here is that it doesn't necessarily mean government control. Some socialists are for that, some aren't, but the thing is the ones that aren't are more focusing on less need for private property. They say no private property, that's the goal, whether or not the government controls it. So and distributist idea is, yes, we do need private property, but at the same time they want to also make sure everyone has the opportunity to have private property as well. And like I say, capitalists will say the same thing, but it's just a structure that's gone awry, which some people will say that, how do I say it? It's, some capitalists base, some people say wage slavery, and that's the thing that did happen. Some say that that doesn't happen, maybe not now, but the thing is that people who work low income jobs are going to say something different.
One question that I have, you'd mentioned that capitalism kind of is inherently atheistic.
I'm not the one who first came up with that. I remember reading it on a blog. I don't remember where. Don't quote me on this. I think it was Edward Fraser. I don't remember. But the idea was that individualism, which is basically it's basically more based off the state of nature idea, where we're not made for each other. And the thing is that when it comes to atheism, it's basically the idea of I don't want to say it's more like egotistic. Some are trying not to say that, but I guess you can say I guess I'll just have to talk about more like the Trinity, or the concept of love, which involves an I and a thou, like how Martin Buber would say, or if that's how you pronounce his name. And the thing is that that's actually how love is formed. Love, that you have to have love. You have to have another person to love. But when it comes to the annihilation of that, which is the essence of that being God, the annihilation of that would just be pure individualism.
And and he gives sort of maybe a way of seeing capitalism as leading to that. Because I understand in a way, but in some ways I think, I know the sort of gripe against capitalism is that you have big corporations and holding a lot more power, but a lot of these corporations in some areas are people who have given their time to create, and jobs and things that are in their corporation. So it's not all, is that?
No, not necessarily. In some ways, the people who run the businesses, I think they're also enslaved to their own businesses. Mm. And it's a lot more than just businesses. There's also the problems with banking, and there's also problems with people. They say the machines will replace people, and I remember reading in Thomas Sowell, he says they actually provide more opportunities for jobs. But then I thought to myself, okay, but what if you don't have the skills to do that? That's kind of the thing is that the thing is that even if it has more opportunity, the thing is it also has to match the people with the skills for those opportunities. And I think I would say inherently atheistic because it's based off the Darwinian conception of competition between people.
Oh, okay.
So that would say that would be also another case. I guess you could say capitalism. I guess I could say not inherently atheistic, but more, it is, but to narrow it down, I guess you could say more inherently Darwinistic.
Okay, so lacking love in a way is what you're saying, what you went back to as the Trinitarian example. It doesn't have as its basis. It's the survival of the fittest type of mentality. And that would also be another problem with socialism because it's collectivism. But the problem with collectivism is there's no real love in it. You're basically forced to be with other people, but there's no mutuality. To have mutuality, you're going to have actual love, which is what Catholic teaching will call solidarity. And so distributism cannot function without solidarity. If you try to make distributism without solidarity, it's just socialism.
So where does the role of the family come into this concept? I mean, I would guess that you take a step back and listen to what you're saying is that the family would be kind of a centristic approach to accomplishing these goals in a distributive economy or existence. Would that be correct? Or
that would be correct, and it's also part of. This is another economic topic for another time, but it's focusing more on the national economy. But distributed is more on local economy. But as part of that national one, there's a thing called conservative corporatism, which is basically the idea that the family should be the unit of an economy. And it's the idea is that big businesses should be at the benefit of the community, which should be at the benefit of the family. And so it's more of a hierarchical business right there. And going back to distributism, the family is the unit of, it's supposed to be the unit of society, the fundamental unit, because The thing is that the family is supposed to be part of what's called the Ordo. I'm pretty sure people have heard this recently. Ordo Amoris, which is the order of love, which is basically going first to God, then to self, basically in your relation to God, and then the family, and so on and so forth. And the thing is that when it comes to like an economy, well, of course God is important, but at the same time, economy is more run based on like an actual empirical existence. Like God is existence. I'm talking about people who you can actually like feel and touch, kind of thing. And the family would be the first unit of that, because that's the first actual corporeal manifestation of love right there. And
So as we're kind of putting this all together, so property ownership, very, very critical, and a wide opportunity to obtain property and own property. So the second approach we talked about the family being the kind of the center of it all. And then you'd mentioned businesses, and you may have mentioned co-ops too. I'm not quite sure, but with regard to small businesses and co-ops, being the driving force in that local community. So is that, am I explaining it right? Is this the umbrella that we're trying to create to kind of give the audience an overview of what exactly we're talking about?
Well, I guess you could say is that, I guess to provide that umbrella, I would refer to what I would call, or not what I would call, what Michael J. Sandel would call a contributive justice, which is basically the idea that what you do must be at the benefit of the common good, and you must basically contribute to the common good. And like it goes against the idea of a meritocracy, which is, you originally meant moral merit, but now it means just practicalness, like basically a society of scientists. And it goes against the idea of affirmative action. But long story short, the thing is that contributive economy, I have to think about how do I apply this to an economic system. And I guess you can say there's a thing that actually does follow that. It's called what they call time banks. Time banks is basically the idea where you have local credit, which is called time credit. And what you do is that someone hires you, or hires, air quotes, they put online, they say, hey, can you do this for 3 hours for me? If you do it, I'll give you 3 time credits. And so it goes off on that labor theory of value right there, which says, I know that's more like a Marxist idea right there, but it actually precedes it. And the idea is basically how much you get is based off how long you worked. In this case, at least, that's how time banks work, where you actually contribute to society by doing something for someone, community service for a certain number of hours, and then they give you the money based off of those number of hours you worked. And they said it's basically reminds people who are unemployed that they still have a job to do. So basically, even if you are homeless, you can still get paid based off of the time credits you work on.
And that goes back to the comment I wanted to make. So, well, there's 2 things now that have accumulated. The one is the common good you mentioned, and that as being important, but also to kind of, I guess, counterbalance that is the dignity of man, I believe, is very much a part of the distributive concept. Am I right in that?
Yes, that would be the case. Just to clarify something here, I was talking about the labor theory of value. I don't think that's actually proper when it comes to standard economy. I'm just restricting that to just time banks. Now, when you're talking about the dignity of man, that's the thing you have to be careful on. That's where you have to have a religious influence in mind, because that's the moral thing. That's where I can talk about the subjective theory of value, which is practiced by modern economies now, thanks to the Austrian School of Economics, which basically says that value is based on your subjective preferences. Like, you could have like this iPhone I'm looking at right here, or the Android, whatever you call it. You could say, and this little pen right here, someone, I don't know why, they will probably find more value in this pen than the phone, and so you have to put more price onto the pen right here, because that's basically the subjective theory of value, which is how economies run now. But there's also the scholastic theory of value, which is basically the subjective theory of value or price theory, but limited by morals. So where some goods you can't sell because of how immoral they are. And so then you could say this price theory of value actually did come from the school of Salamanca, which did come from Dominican thought, later on the Jesuit thought. And so there is a Catholic backing to it, but the thing is that what's difference between the Austrians and the Catholic version is that the Catholic version had morals as limits. The Austrians not necessarily. I mean, you can have virtuous Austrians, but it's not inherent in their economic system. So.
You're listening to Christ our King Catholic Radio. It's Catholic Radio for Acadiana. We are listening to 90.5 FM, 99.5 FM, and 1230 AM. We are your lay Dominicans, your third order Dominicans, and this is our show that comes on every Thursday at 4 p.m., Studium to Studio, where we take the fruits of our contemplation and we bring it to the studio, and we're able to do that with the financial support of Stein Lumber, and a shout out to them with locations throughout all of Acadiana. So today we are talking about distributivism, and it's something that, of course, I guess it was flourishing back in medieval times, but it really kind of reared its head again at the turn of the century. So at the end of I'd say what maybe 1890s, 1895s, there was a lot of discussion on how do you find a bridge between capitalism and socialism, and you had great thinkers of the time. G.K. Chesterton was talking about this. Hilaire Belloc was talking about it. And then from a Catholic perspective, and this is where the Dominicans, I guess, come in a different way. But Pope Leo XIII, who was very much a Thomistic pope, who really reincorporated the teachings of the church, and saying that St. Thomas Aquinas and his writings will be the foundation for our theology, our philosophy, and our thought. And so this is kind of where the Dominicans come in, because even though Pope Leo XIII was not a Dominican, he gave us all kind of wonderful. I think he had 11 encyclicals on Mary, and more importantly, as we discuss this topic today, the encyclical Rerum Novarum, talking about workers' rights and how workers play in this economic society that was really thriving, and in some ways didn't have many controls over it. So today we're talking about how I guess what it is, and then how can we incorporate it today? We live in a modern society, and is it possible to incorporate these aspects of distributivism in a society today? What are the challenges, or how can we go about trying to do this?
I guess you would say is that a lot of distributism is basically one part of a problem that's going on across the world. And I think it's not going to work unless you emphasize monasticism, because it comes to a point where these were actually ideas based off the monks, and you could say is that a lot of distributism isn't really going to do much if you don't have monks first. So I guess you can, and that actually goes for a lot of problems, a lot of localist problems, honestly, like education, etc., etc. They say a lot of that won't improve education, economy, all that stuff. It's not going to get it better unless you have monks come back and actually be the influencers of society. And so, I mean, that was part of honestly a shady website, a shady site I saw, but I decided to just read it anyway, and I thought it did kind of make sense, where you have to have the monks come back to be the influencers of society and provide the heart of a communitarian culture. One of them being, I guess you could say, distributism is what I would call communitarian economics.
So one point I wanted to go back to is this property, the idea of property, because I think that was the controversial thing or I guess what was criticized by socialists, criticized Rerum Novarum, I think, because of the ownership of property idea. But I think it gives a very good, and we now have a very, even I think more solid basis of understanding that if we don't own something, we don't feel responsible for something, and therefore we don't give our best to that something, right? So there's a reason why even psychologically, let alone spiritually, that we should have the ability to retain property.
And I think that was something. I think that was something Heinrich Pesk mentioned when he said he was supporter of a society of owners, but he said he believed that that the reason why everyone should be an owner is because it actually emphasizes human dignity.
Right.
And but he wasn't he was not a socialist. He could be classified in a distributive section, but he's more onto He is more to something called solidarism, which is distinguished from distributism, but is actually completely compatible to create what's called neo-scholastic economics. That's a topic for another time, but I'm gonna focus on distributism right here, just being, I will call not the answer, but rather a piece to the answer. Nothing inherently wrong in itself, but rather not the complete answer we're looking for.
And it would, I have to say, it seems like it would be difficult to implement in its entirety because of the way, especially right now, our global economy is working. And this idea of subsidiarity and localizing the production of things, I mean, you have to completely shift everyone's mindset. But I do think there's an effort to do that. I've seen in some communities trying to buy local. What do you think about, is that even possible that we can make such a big shift in? Well,
we had Germany try to take the social market economy, which is based off of distributive thought. Not exactly distributism, it's ordoliberalism, which is not the same way as American neoliberalism. Ordoliberalism is basically the idea the government has to have limits on the monopolies, but at the same time not have total control over it. And distributism, someone said, or at least on this site called the Imaginative Conservative, called it just basically localized ordoliberalism or radical ordoliberalism. But the thing is that people say social market economy, but honestly, I think that's also an incomplete system. I believe there's more to it than just that, and there's more to it. It's more for free trade. I'm not exactly a protectionist in the absolute sense, but more really on the try to do some tariffs to make balance of trade. But that's not the point here. The point is to show that some economies that try to apply it don't apply it to the fullest, but it has shown some good effects. Like Germany trying to go post World War II and try to improve the economy with what I think is called the Rhinish miracle. But in another effort, another person who hasn't been talked a lot about, but I think should be talked about, is C.H. Douglas. And his idea of the Douglas social credit hasn't been talked about since like the 30s. But some people say it's not a working economy. But the thing is that no one really talks much about it a lot, so I don't see much debate on it. So whether I'm right or wrong, I think it's just best to bring it up now, because some distributists have claimed them as one of their own, even though he didn't describe himself as one, and I don't think he even knew what it was. But his idea was basically, basically people are not getting paid by how much they actually earn. And it's a very complicated economic system that I'm going to say it's best to watch the YouTube series, the animated YouTube series, because it has like the videos to show an explanation. If you try to read it, good luck. There's so hard to understand what he's trying to say. He's trying to, in a way, no offense to Chesterton fans, but he talks like Chesterton. I have no idea what Chesterton is talking about in a lot of his stuff. But what he's trying to do basically is he's trying to get the government to provide what looks like a universal basic income, but his system is basically that without the taxes. You're basically making free money that you don't actually have to pay for to make. And his idea is not only to give that to everyone. They also criticize the central bank, the Federal Reserve also. But the thing is that they don't call for its abolition, but rather what they call for is a more democratic economy where people, while the central bank still exists, it's just not as dependent as it is now. So the goal is to make it not non-existent, just less dependent, make people less dependent on it. And so distributists claim this as distributist thought, because he criticized both capitalism and socialism in his works, and he says that the goal must be for everyone to be able to have enough wealth to actually be able to work, to actually have their own property. Again, this sounds like a welfare state, but the thing is that this is actually supposed to be free. This is supposed to be free money without taxes, and the goal is to try to make people less dependent on the bank. So it wouldn't necessarily be a welfare state in its purpose, at least. But like I said, no one talked about it, so we don't get much debate about it. So I'm not a genius on this. And I'm gonna be honest, I don't know if it will work or not, but it's best to bring it up, at least to get some conversation starting.
Okay. Well, I know we're sliding into a lot of economy, which is way over my head. So I'm going to rein it back to the distributism and the idea of the justice that's in it. And the idea I think you brought up is a fair wage, right? Somebody who works should get a fair wage, and
that would be a case. Also that'd be like some people will say try not Georgism, or at least neo-Georgism, which is basically Georgism, but they'll accept some tariffs. But the thing is that they want to do is land value tax, which some distributors decided to say we'll adopt that because that's actually that actually works with distributist idea. We replace property tax with land value tax, where instead of getting taxed by what you put on your property, you get taxed by the value of your land, and by homebound. You can actually put some of Catholic philosophy in this. It's called a social mortgage by, I think, Pope John Paul II, where he said that land belongs to everyone, but everyone does own property by the labor they put into it. And the thing is that, according to George's thought, if you have unattended property, you start getting taxed on that, and so therefore if you don't want to get taxed, you're gonna have to give up that property so someone else can use. And so I say that follows with the social mortgage idea, because land isn't technically your own unless you start laboring on it. And so some distributors say, we'll put that so people can put more property into that. Some people can own more land. And they say, what happens if you have excess wealth from the land value tax? Some people said there should be a universal basic income on that, but I thought let's try putting the Douglas social credit on that, and try using this for what I think would be a better purpose. If you want to get people to not, let's say, take advantage of the system and not go to work, what you can do is incentivize work by actually using the excess wealth of the land value tax as wage subsidies, so that people with low income jobs can get higher wages and make what's a living wage. And so that will follow distributor's thought right there.
Well, this is a great episode to follow last week's episode, which is on the intellectual life. And because this is something I know, Matthew, you're very passionate about, a lot of different ways to kind of fix the economy, kind of make the world work, a good Catholic.
I'll be honest, I am not an economist, but at the same time, the people who are ruining the economy, I will say, are the economists.
Who have two hands. On one hand, you have another. So, but no, if you are interested in learning more about this, G.K. Chesterton has a book called An Outline of Sanity. And then Hilaire Belloc has two books, The Servile State and an essay in the restoration of property. So if you want to delve into this topic at much greater length, this discussion is, I think, something that needs to be contemplated on, and this is why, we have these topics. And thank you, Matthew, for bringing your knowledge and insight to us. We greatly appreciate that.
Thank you. And I also to recommend Wilhelm Röpke, who was not a distributist, but he was an oral liberal who was influenced by distributist thought. And then I would also mention Friedrich Hayek, who was definitely not a distributist, but they say he's different from Ludwig von Mises because he did have some distributist influence in it. So some of his positions you can actually try to apply to distributism. And I recommended those two because they come after Hilaire Belloc and Chesterton, but they're more into the modern, economy was modernizing, so that they have more insight into that.
Great, thank you. And remember to stand firm in the absolute truth, Jesus Christ, because only the truth bears grace.
Lived through time, passed through fire, broke my heart, wounded desire, changed my life, fixed the past, stared at death and it stared back, standing fast in the light of the word.